So for my approach to discipline, I think that something that's important is giving up authoritarian control as much as possible. I think that sometimes it has its place in the classroom, and students should know that I'm the teacher and they need to listen to what I'm saying to them. And I think that definitely has its place sometimes. But I think that as we progress and move forward in time, that schools are becoming different than they used to be. And I don't think that this is always the appropriate approach to schooling or that it ever was. So I think that it's important to build a classroom where you're establishing relationships first and foremost with students and to be building trusting relationships. So one way that I intend to do that as far as discipline would be with working with students to find the skills and teach them the skills about how to make positive and productive choices regarding behavior. So I think that as a preventative measure, that the teacher should be kind of from the beginning of the year, teaching the students the skills that they need to make these good choices in the classroom, but then also as a discipline measure to remind students of these skills, to give them the skills if a misbehavior is occurring and show them how to use it, and to try to do this as much as possible. So I think that relationships is my approach to discipline, and that's kind of the number one thing that I would be trying to do is to just really work on building those relationships from the very beginning of the year through the end of the year. And I think that it's important to pull the student aside and have discussions. So, not all the time, but if a misbehavior is occurring and you think that the student needs additional information, needs an outlet, needs somebody to talk to, I think that it's really important that you're having those conversations. And it's also important to me. I would to never ask a student to leave class, like to sit out in the hallway, unless there's a violent behavior going on, which then they'd be sent somewhere else. But for the most part, if there's a misbehavior occurring, I would never ask a student to leave the classroom because they're just going to miss instruction, and that might be what they're aiming to do in the first place. And then I also do not ever want to take away recess. I don't think that's beneficial for the student. I don't think that's beneficial for me. I don't think it's beneficial for anyone. And then some of the specific strategies that I would use. The first one would be to show students that I care about them by responding to the misbehaviors. I think there's definitely a time and a place, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of examples, where it's important to ignore a behavior. And I think that that's an approach that you have to kind of judge yourself as the teacher. But I think that it's important to not just, I think it's easy to just sometimes refer a student to the counselor, refer them to somebody else who you think can help them. But I think it's important that even if you're going to end up doing that, that you show the student that you care about them by initially responding to that behavior and trying to come up with a solution on your own. The second strategy would be what I just mentioned, which would be to ignore some behaviors. And I noted that this would only be for minor misbehaviors. But I was in a field class, where there was a student who would crawl around in the back of the room while this other students were up on the carpet. And I wasn't sure what to do. The teacher was ignoring the problem. So I didn't know if she was expecting maybe me to go say something to her. So I sat there and thought about it for a little bit, and then I decided to say something. And the teacher kind of sent me a cue, like, don't, just leave her be. And then she later explained to me that she's causing minor disruptions in the classroom. This is something that occurs, something that she works on separately with the student, but that it's not beneficial to the rest of the class if she takes the time out to every single time this happens to try to redirect that behavior. So I think that there's definitely a time and a place for ignoring the behavior, but again, when it's minor and not causing huge distractions or harming anyone. The third thing would be, when a student is actively engaged, to give them positive praising. And then as soon as the student who's misbehaving hears that positive reinforcement, and then as soon as they start to do that behavior, praise them immediately. So as soon as they start to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing, give them that praise, because a lot of times the students that aren't receiving it are the students who are often the ones that are misbehaving. So when they hear that they're doing something positive, I think that this has a huge impact on them. And that's a way to motivate them through using other students kind of as an example, and then giving both students the recognition. And then the fourth thing that I noted would be to sometimes involve the students in a problem. So if you're teaching a lesson and students are misbehaving, they're not engaged, to just throw their name into the problem, like the math problem that you're talking about or the story that you're reading. My dad is a teacher, and he talks about how sometimes he'll be like reading a chapter book in the front of the classroom, and he can see that a student's not paying attention, doing whatever at their desk, and he just veers off from the story and starts creating a little separate story with that student's name in it, and it makes the class laugh, it makes that student get re-engaged, and then he keeps going with the book. So something to that extent where you involve them and kind of draw their attention back in. So those are the 4 strategies. I'm sure there's a lot more, but those are the ones that I noted, and I got a lot of this information from responding to behavior that disrupts the learning process.